Masechet Zevaḥim, Daf Lamed Tet. On the previous daf, we saw the statement of Rav Papa over here, who said that regarding the three sprinklings after the first sprinkling, the second, third, and fourth, for a korban hatat, if some of that blood fell onto the garment of the Kohen, then the commandment applies that he has to launder it. And Papa says, what's the proof? And he quoted a Mishnah later on in this Masechet that said the words, Nitaz min savad ala beged enot ta'on kibus. Min hakeder min hayesod enot ta'on kibus. If the blood splattered from the neck of the animal, you don't have to wash the garment. And if it came from the horn of the mizbeach or from the base, meaning it was already applied to one of those things, and then bounced off or somehow dripped onto the garment, also does not need kibus. So when wood, you have to launder it. So the Papa inferred from here, min hara'ui lakeren ta'on kibus. That means if it's fitting that it should be placed on the corner, and that, so in other words, it's still in the cup, then it's and it falls onto the garment, that is when it needs laundering, but not if it already went onto the corner. That is Rav Papa's proof. We asked a question about that. If you apply that methodology to min hakeren, why not say the same thing to min hayesod? And that would mean that the shirayim, the leftover blood in the cup, in the vessel, after all the sprinklings, that is meant to be placed on the base but was not yet poured on the base, then that should apply also. If that gets onto a garment, then it should have to be laundered, although that would be after what we just talked about. In other words, Rav Papa says that from the time of the first sprinkling until and through the second, third, fourth sprinkling, all that blood in the cup, if it falls on the garment, the garment has to be laundered. And then if you learn the same thing from min hayesod, if you apply the same methodology, then that would mean even after all the four sprinklings, also one would have to. But that's a problem because it goes against the opinion of Chachamim. And so yesterday we said, this is Rabbi Nehemiah. But now we're going to start off with an alternate answer. Ravina Amar, Mina Keden Mamash, Min hayesod, Min ha'ira'ui layesod. Ravina says we don't have to apply the exegesis that you did the same way to both terms in that Mishnah. Rather, when it says mina keren, that if it splatters off of the corner of the horn of the mizbeach, that means literally only if it splatters off, it was already applied to the corner, and then splatters off of it onto the garment. That's when you do not have to launder it. But if it's still in the cup and waiting to be sprinkled onto the corner, any of the four corners, then you do have to launder. The words min ha-yesod in the Mishnah, however, is not referring to blood that actually was already poured onto the base and then splattered onto the garment. That for sure would not require washing, but rather the words min hayesod are referring to blood that's still in the vessel after all the sprinklings were done and it is ready, is fit to pour onto the base. That blood does not require, if it falls onto the garment, will not require laundering. And so if we read it in this way, although it's inconsistent, which we're about to ask about, because we're inferring, we're using min hakeren mamash, and min hayesod we're saying from min hara'ui layesod. So we'll ask about the inconsistency and how we treat these two terms. But if we accept that, then this will prove Rav Papa's opinion directly, because min hakeren, since that means only if it's on the corner, then you don't do laundering, but that means if it's ready to be placed onto the corners, you do laundering, and that would apply to all four corners before you applied it to the corners and you're ready to sprinkle on the corners, still in the cup, and it falls onto the garment, then you have to launder, which is exactly what Rav Papa said. And the second phrase, min hayesod, don't learn from here that only if it was poured onto the yesod, then you don't have to launder. But if it's ready to be put on the yesod, then you would have to launder. No, min hayesod in the Mishnah is referring to that which is itself ready to be poured on the yesod, and that's what the Mishnah says will not require laundering. So in this way, we don't have to say that this Mishnah is following the opinion of Rabbi Nechemia. We could say that the Mishnah is following the majority opinion, as is Rav Papa. Amar le Rav Tachlifa bar Gaza le Ravina. Ema idi v'idi ra'oihu. But Rav Tachlifa bar Gaza es Ravina. Wait, maybe, how do you know that this one's mamash and this one is ra'ui? Why don't you be consistent and say both of them are ra'ui, meaning that for both of them, if it's ready to be sprinkled onto the keren, then it does not require. And this one also, ready to be poured, also does not require it to be cleansed, which would mean that only the blood beforehand, before the sprinkling, would require laundering. But once you do the first sprinkling, then that's it. The rest of the blood that is ready to be sprinkled for the second, third, and fourth, if that poured onto the garment, would not require sprinkling. And that way, you can read both of the terms in the same way. But we challenge that. Hai mai, hashta ra'ui la keren amart la, ra'ui la yesod mi ba'ya. That wouldn't make sense because you wouldn't then need both of these terms. We could learn it from a kal vachomer. If that which is ready to be poured onto the horns, meaning you did this first horn already, and now the rest of the blood that is waiting and fit to be poured onto the second, third, and fourth horns, you say that blood will not require laundering of a garment if it falls on the garment, then all the more so that which is fit to be poured on the base will not require laundering, because that's afterwards. That's after the process of the three horns. And so if during the three horn sprinkling that blood would not require, then certainly at the point that when it's ready to be poured on the base would not require it. And then that would just be a wordy Mishnah. Once you say min hakeren, you wouldn't have to say min hayesod. So rather, from the structure of the Mishnah and the fact that it has to say both of these things, that shows that Ravina's reading is correct. Ela min hakeren mamash, min hayesod min hara'ui la yesod. So rather, we must say that when it says, if it's on the horn, that means literally when it's on the horn already, and then it bounces and splatters off onto the garment, then you don't have to launder that garment. But if it's still waiting to be sprinkled, then yes, because that would be before. And so now it has to tell you, and if it's ready to be poured onto the yesod, then also no, that it does not require laundering. And so that would be necessary because that's the point at which it stops. And so now we have a good reading of Rav Papa and is proof from that Mishnah. Next, Kol Nitanit al Mizbeach HaPinimi. Our Mishnah continued and said that any types of korbanot that the blood is placed on the inner altar, is taken into the sanctuary, that would include the pad and sa'ir on Yom Kippur, and also for a kohen gadol who makes a sin by mistake, and for the community, the judges who make a sin by mistake, and if the community does idol worship by mistake. So all these have to be sprinkled inside, and requires that it be sprinkled besides on the curtain, also all four corners of the Mizbeach. And if you miss one, then it does not atone. Tenor Banan, ve'asa kasher asa ma ba lilmod. The Gemara quotes a baraita, which will prove from a pasuk all the laws that we just mentioned, that for all the inner chatat offerings, one is required to put it on all four corners, and if you miss one, it's no good. And we're going to learn this from a pasuk in Vayikra, chapter 4, which lists the various types of korban chatats for various people, for an individual, and then for the kohen gadol, and it lists all the details of exactly what he has to do. And then it says regarding the whole community, if the judges make a mistake, and it lists all the same details, almost exactly the same things that one has to do, and it says you have to put it on the four corners but before Hashem. It already said that above. And then you have this pasuk, which is all extra. Ve'asa lapad, you're going to do to this pod for the community, kasher asa lepad chatat, as you did to the previous one that we mentioned. Ken yaseh lo, also do to this one. Ve'chiper alehen hakohen ve'nislach lo, and then the kohen will make atonement for him, meaning for the judges and for them, and they will be forgiven. Now, why do you need this pasuk to say you do everything for this pod as you did for the previous pod, if it already detailed all the things that you do. So this is redundant. And so the answer is, Lichpol ba'aza'ato, v'limed she'im chised achad mikol ha'matanot lo asa velo kelum. It wanted to repeat that you have to do these sprinklings in order to teach that if they are not optional, they're mandatory. And if you missed any one of the 4 sprinklings, it's as if you did nothing. That's an exegetical rule. If you repeat something, it could be le'akev. אין לי אלא מתן 7 שמעכבות בכל מקום. מתן 4 מניין, תלמוד אומר כן יעשה. Now, it could be that's repeating only to teach me the 7 times that the blood is sprinkled onto the parochet, onto the curtain that's in the hechal, between the kodesh and kodesh kodashim. Maybe that's what it's saying, but how do you know it's also telling me that the sprinkling on the 4 corners of the mizbach haketoret are also required? Oh, that's because the pasuk says ken ya'aseh, that same pasuk. We would assume that the 7 are required because in all places, anywhere, anytime you have to sprinkle onto the curtain, those are absolutely required. But for the 4 corners, the one outside for the chad korban on the outside mizbeach are not required. So here I would say, well, maybe the inside mizbeach is like the outside mizbeach and is not required. So that's why I have the pasuk in the words in the pasuk kasher asa to teach me that ken ya'aseh, rather from later on, ken ya'aseh over here, that is the same. Now the other words in the pasuk also we're going to learn from each one of them. Lapad, why does it have to say lapad twice? Vasa lapad, kasher sa lepad. It has to teach me ze pad Yom Kippurim, that the parachatat on Yom Kippur also has the same requirement, all 7 on the parochet and all 4 on the mizbach haketoret are required. Kasher asa lepad. What do we do with that? And the next pad, ze pad Kohen Mashiach. That includes the pad of Kohen Mashiach, which was above. And so the repetition here is telling me that not only is it required for the communal offering, chatat offering, but also for the one that's before, for the Kohen Gadol who makes a mistake. The word hachatat, elu seirei avodah zarah. Hachatat is for if the community does avodah zarah by mistake, they bring a sa'ir, and that is also sprinkled inside the hechal, and therefore has the same requirements. You can't miss any of the corners. Now, since it says these extra words, maybe we should include also a sa'ir lechatat that we bring on holidays and on Rosh Chodesh. Maybe those also are required to give all of 4 of the sprinklings, although those are given outside, not inside. Talmud domar lo. That's why the pasuk says kasher yaseh lo. Lo means is limiting only to these and not to others. So it's limiting the other chatat offerings that are done outside, where the all 4 corners are not required. Now, why did you include the some of them, like the ones for the communal offering and for avodah zarah, and you excluded the seririm for holidays and Rosh Chodesh? Why not do the other way around? אחר שריבה הכתוב במאת מרבה אני את אלו שמכפרין על עבירת מצווה ידועה מוציא אני אלו שאין מכפרין על עבירת מצווה ידועה. And the answer is, since the pasuk both is inclusive and exclusive, it makes sense to include other items that atone for specific mitzvot. All of these have in common that they're specific mitzvah. If a Kohen Gadol or the community, they violate a specific mitzvah, that's what it's for. Or if the community does avodah zarah, that's for a specific mitzvah. We know exactly what they did, and you're bringing the korban chatat for that occasion. You could be that you go years without bringing any of these. So you're bringing it only for a specific mitzvah that is required. And therefore I'm going to include those, and I'm going to exclude the sa'ir lechatat that's brought on holidays and Rosh Chodesh, because that covers everybody. You just bring it just in case anybody did anything, if they brought tum'ah into the mikdash by mistake. So it's not for a specific person, for a specific occasion. It's just to cover any mistakes of tum'ah not for something that was actually known that for sure they did something like that. So that's why it makes more sense to include the things that are inside and not the things that are outside. Vechiper af al pi shelo samach venislach af al pi shelo natan shirayim. The word vechiper in a pasuk here, vechiper and venislach, that comes to say that it will atone, has a lot of power to atone, even if you didn't do semicha, if the elders did not put their hands on it, or if they did not put the remnant of the remainder of the blood, if they didn't pour it onto the base of the altar, although you're supposed to do those things, if you didn't, b'di'avad, the korban still atones. That's why it comes to say, v'chiper, even in this case, v'nislach, even in that case. We ask again here, why did you decide to say, oh, if you miss one of the sprinklings, it's no good, but it's okay if you miss the semicha and shirayim? Maybe say the other way around, and it's coming to include, oh, you have to do semicha and shirayim, and maybe the chiper and islach is to tell me that you don't have to do all the hazaot. Amrata posel b'hazaot shemakevot bechol makom, machshirani b'smicha v'shirayim she'en makevot bechol makom. So we say it makes more sense to say that it will not be good. It's disqualified if you miss any of the 7 plus 4 sprinklings that are required in all places. It makes more sense that if you miss any of the sprinklings that are always required, that's the sprinklings of the 7 sprinklings on the curtain. So if you miss any of those, since those are required in all places, we're going to prove that on the next stuff that's true always. So it makes sense to say that it's the sprinklings that this pasuk comes to require for these various korban hatat offerings that are also sprinkled on the inside mizbeach, and therefore it makes more sense to say that regarding simicha and shirayim, where we find other cases that those are not absolutely required. So for these inner korban chatats also, it would make sense that the pasuk is coming to say that they are not absolutely required. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen ve'amen.